When I think about it now, in the depth of the night, I realize that everything could have been different. But one meeting, one unexpected glance, one invitation, and everything changed. If only I had known back then where this path would lead. But in life, it's not always easy to foresee where danger hides and where happiness awaits. This island became the beginning of something unknown for me, not only in space, but also in my soul. When I saw the invitation for the retreat in my email, my first thought was, this is a good opportunity to break away from the usual routine. I didn't even ask Brian, didn't clarify how he would feel about it. I just agreed. I was so tired of the monotony of our marriage, the endless conversations about his business and financial problems, the back and forth between work and home, home and work. Everything seemed so ordinary, predictable, boring. I couldn't remember the last time I felt anything alive within me. The retreat was held on a private island owned by a corporation, and it promised to be more than just a team-building event. It was to be a real adventure. A secluded corner of nature, a warm sea, beaches with white sand, unusual workshops. It all sounded like the perfect way to forget about everyday worries. I imagined myself breaking free from reality for a few days, allowing myself to enjoy the moment, rather than just running in circles of habitual tasks. When our boat approached the shore of the island, I inhaled the salty air, and for the first time in a long time, felt free. I hadn't seen Brian for several days, and it felt strangely relieving. He's always busy, and although I love him, I missed something. Something I couldn't even articulate for myself. The first few hours on the island flew by, with the hustle and bustle, check-ins, organization, briefings. But when I entered the outdoor conference hall, where the first meeting was about to begin, I immediately saw him, Nicholas Harper. Our CEO rarely appeared at the office, and I only knew about him from rumors. Young, successful, with an unconventional approach to business. However, in reality, he turned out to be even more charismatic than I could have imagined. Tall, with a confident gait, a smile that seemed like it could melt the coldest ice. But it wasn't just his appearance. Something about him drew you in, made you watch, listen, and wonder. Nicholas began his speech, and I involuntarily followed his every move, every word. He didn't speak like most executives. He wasn't reading a pre-written speech, but was sincerely sharing his thoughts and ideas. His approach to management was unusual. Less control, more trust, and freedom for the employees. Freedom is our key asset, he said. And at that moment, I felt that this word resonated inside me. Freedom. Maybe that's what I've been missing? After the speech, all the participants dispersed to their rooms. But I stayed in place, pondering what I had heard. My gaze accidentally met his eyes. He approached me, and tilting his head slightly, smiled. Lily, right? His voice was soft but confident. Yes, I replied, slightly flustered by the fact that he knew my name. Nice to meet you. Likewise, he squinted and continued. I noticed you were listening to my speech very attentively. Did you like it? It was inspiring, I said, trying not to show how much I was impressed, not only by his approach, but also by him as a person. I'm glad to hear that. Lily, I believe there's something unique in each of us, and I'd like to know what inspires you. Perhaps we'll have a chance to discuss it later, he suggested, continuing to look directly into my eyes, as if waiting for my answer. I didn't know what to say. Was this just a friendly gesture, or something more? I felt a strange excitement within me, as if a door to a new, unknown space was opening. Sure, I replied, trying to stay calm, though inside, everything was bubbling. For the rest of the day, I couldn't stop thinking about our brief conversation. There was something magical in his words, and in the way he looked at me. It seemed like he saw the real me, not just another employee. And that was new, strange, and appealing. In the evening, when the sun was already setting, we were all invited to an open-air dinner. I approached the table where Nicholas was sitting, and he gestured for me to join. Have a seat, Lily. There's a great view here, he said, pointing to the sea. We started talking, and I felt the light sea breeze cooling my skin, but at the same time, something new was igniting inside me. He asked questions about my work, my hobbies, my life, and each of his questions was filled with genuine interest. This was not just business communication, but something much more. I don't remember how long we talked, but it seemed as if time had stopped. His gaze, his voice, his manner of conversation, everything about him was so captivating that I couldn't look away. And suddenly, at some point, I realized I was no longer in control of my feelings. Maybe this was only the beginning. Or perhaps I had already stepped onto a path with no return? The evening of the first day on the island was exceptionally warm. The stars seemed closer than ever, and the sound of the surf mingled with the quiet conversations of the retreat participants. A fire burned on the shore, and I sat in a circle with the other employees, waiting for the evening's team activities to begin. Everyone seemed quite relaxed. No one was thinking about work, and this feeling of freedom that permeated everything around us frightened me a little. I wasn't used to being in such an environment. I always needed structure, clear goals. But here, it was different. No strict schedules, no reports, just the chance to be ourselves. When Nicholas announced the start of the first team activity, everyone waited eagerly. He explained the rules, something like a quest where we had to solve problems relying only on ingenuity and intuition. I expected to be paired with anyone, but not with him. Yet, when I heard my name along with his, my heart inexplicably began to beat faster. "Lily!" Nicholas called, approaching me. "It looks like we're on the same team. Ready?" I nodded, trying to hide a slight smile. Why was I so nervous? It was just a game, just a team, just work. But everything inside me screamed that it wasn't so. As we headed down the path leading deeper into the island, I felt a light touch of his hand on my back, almost imperceptible, but unexpected. The moment seemed like an eternity. The task turned out to be more challenging than I expected. We had to find several markers hidden in different parts of the island, using only clues and a map. Nicholas walked ahead, confidently and effortlessly maneuvering between the trees, and I tried not to lag behind. At some point, we got lost and decided to take a break by a small stream that gently murmured nearby. "This place is incredible," he said, sitting down on a fallen tree. "I've always dreamed of something like this." "Do you travel a lot?" I asked, sitting down beside him. "Yes, but it's more for work than pleasure," Nicholas replied. "Although, when I started, it was different. I was sure my life would be filled only with adventures." "What changed?" I asked curiously. He smiled, but his eyes dimmed for a moment. "Reality," he said. "Life turned out to be not as romantic as it seemed at first. On my path to success, there were many hardships. In moments when it seemed like I had lost everything, I had to rethink my goals, my values. And one day, I realized I was chasing success and forgetting about life." I nodded, feeling his words resonate within me. My life also seemed like some sort of closed loop, where everything was predictable and calm, but at the same time, dull and joyless. Nicholas's words awakened something in me that I had long forgotten, the desire to feel alive. "I know what you're talking about," I whispered, looking at him. He turned to me and looked into my eyes intently, as if trying to read my thoughts. "Really?" His voice was quiet, almost drowned out by the sound of the water. "And what is it that you're missing, Lily?" That question caught me off guard. I didn't know what to say. What was I really missing? Brian was a good man, we had a stable life. But maybe that very stability was the problem. Maybe I craved something more, something I couldn't find in my everyday life. "Emotions," I said, almost without realizing I was saying it aloud. "Real, deep emotions. Sometimes it feels like I'm just floating along, not feeling anything." "I understand," Nicholas said, and placed his hand on my shoulder. "We have a chance to change that." I felt his touch stir something new within me. We continued our way through the island, but now something more than just friendly conversation hung between us. We shared life stories, laughed, and reminisced, and the more I listened to him, the more I realized he had opened a new reality for me. When we returned to the other retreat participants, it was already dark, and everyone had gathered around a large bonfire on the beach. A light breeze played with my hair, and the fire gave everything a special atmosphere of mystery. I sat next to Nicholas, and it seemed no one noticed. "Lily, tell your story," he asked, when the conversation turned to what inspires us. I hesitated a little, but then decided to share. "I've always loved taking risks, challenging myself," I began, feeling his full attention focused on me. "But lately, it feels like I've been avoiding it, afraid." "Afraid of what?" Nicholas asked, raising an eyebrow. "Afraid of losing what I have," I admitted. "Although sometimes, it feels like I've already lost something important." "Sometimes, to gain something truly valuable, you have to take a risk," he said, and I felt something inside me tremble. Those words sounded so simple, but they made me think. The night continued, and the conversations around the fire grew more candid. We laughed, shared memories and dreams, and I realized I hadn't felt so alive in a long time. With each passing minute, I became more convinced that there was something more between Nicholas and me than just interest. When the fire began to die down, and most of the participants dispersed, we were left alone, sitting side by side. Nicholas looked at me with the same warm smile as before. But in his eyes, I saw something new, something that wouldn't let me rest. Lily, he said softly, sometimes I think that certain meetings in life happen for a reason. I didn't know what to say. I felt he was right, but I was afraid to admit it even to myself. Our eyes met, and at that moment, I realized that something important had already begun to change. After a candlelit dinner on the beach, the atmosphere was magical, and it seemed as if time had stopped. The other retreat participants were already starting to drift away, some heading to bed, others continuing to chat off to the side. The crackling campfire cast dancing shadows on the pristine white sand, and the soft rustle of the waves served as the perfect backdrop for what was about to happen. I remained alone on the shore, a bit away from everyone, pondering whether I should return to my room or linger here a little longer, enjoying the quiet and cozy atmosphere. My thoughts were interrupted by Nicholas's voice. Lily! He approached me almost silently, as if on purpose, not to startle me. May I join you? Of course, I replied, trying not to show that his presence unsettled me. He sat down beside me, and I felt his proximity making the air around us heavier and warmer. We started with light conversation, discussing current work matters and recalling funny moments from today's activities. But gradually, the talk shifted to more personal topics. You know, Nicholas said, gazing into the distance where the stars reflected in the water. I often think about how strangely life is arranged. We spend so much time striving for something, earning money, climbing the career ladder, and we completely forget what is truly important. I looked at him, trying to understand exactly what he meant. What do you think is important? I asked softly. He turned to me, his eyes gleaming in the moonlight. I think it's important to feel like you're living a real life, full of emotions, desires, and aspirations. Something that makes your heart beat faster. I felt something stir inside me. His words resonated with my soul, as if he were speaking directly about what I felt was missing. I didn't know how to respond, so I just looked at him in silence. And you? What is important to you? He asked, not taking his eyes off me. I hesitated, unsure of what to say. But for some reason, at that moment, I felt I could be honest with him. I feel like I've lost that fire, I said, trying not to look away. I've been living out of habit, doing what I thought was right, but I stopped feeling alive. He nodded, as if understanding me better than anyone else. I went through that too, Nicholas replied gently. Sometimes it takes something or someone to rekindle that fire. Our eyes met, and I felt my lips begin to dry. A jumble of thoughts filled my mind, fear, doubt, but also a kind of excitement that I couldn't suppress. He slowly leaned toward me, and at that moment, I felt my heart start to beat faster. Nicholas, I whispered, not knowing what to say. But he didn't let me finish. His lips touched mine, and in that instant, I felt a wave of warmth wash over my entire body. It was a soft, careful kiss, as if he were testing how I would react. I wanted to pull away, to say it was wrong, but my hands instinctively wrapped around his neck. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to sink into the moment. The kiss was like a flash, bright and sudden, like lightning in a dark sky. My consciousness split into two parts. One part screamed that this was unacceptable, that I was married, that I couldn't allow myself such things. But the other part craved it, craved the passion I hadn't felt for so long. I felt his hand on my waist, and his touch was both confident and gentle. My whole body trembled with a mix of fear and desire. I didn't know how long it lasted, but at some point, I pulled away, breathing heavily. This is wrong, I muttered, though even to me, my words sounded unconvincing. Nicholas smiled softly and ran his fingers along my cheek. Sometimes, Lily, right and wrong are just things we invent for ourselves. I know what I feel right now, and it's real. His words awakened a sense of freedom in me again, and I realized that in his presence, my walls were crumbling one by one. I felt as if he saw me as I hadn't seen myself in a long time. I can't, I whispered, trying to regain some clarity of thought. I have a husband, and you have your own life. Lily, he interrupted me, I'm not asking you to leave everything, but you can't deny that there is something between us, and I think it's worth at least trying to understand what it is. I remained silent, looking at him. My thoughts raced between the loyalty I had promised Brian and the new feeling that had seized me. I wanted to run away, to hide from all of this, but I knew it was already too late. Something in my life had already changed, and that could not be ignored. Finally, I nodded and quietly said, I don't know what will happen next, but I'm scared. He smiled, and there was understanding in his eyes. That's normal, Lily. Sometimes fear is the first step towards something real. And at that moment, I realized that my life would never be the same again. I didn't yet know where this path would lead, but I felt that I could no longer turn back. Returning from the island did not bring me the relief I had hoped for. Instead, I felt like I was trapped in a cage that seemed to get smaller and tighter with each passing day. My life returned to its usual course: work, home, morning meetings with colleagues, evenings with Brian. But now all of it felt alien, as if I were watching my life from the outside. At first, I thought that our kiss with Nicholas would remain on the island as something accidental and unrealized. But my thoughts kept returning to that moment. I found myself recalling his voice, his touch, his eyes that looked at me with such understanding and interest that I hadn't felt in a long time. I began catching myself checking my phone, hoping for a message from him. And one day, it came. "How are you?" A short, yet weighty message from Nicholas. My heart began to beat faster. I didn't reply right away. I debated whether I should even respond at all, but I ended up writing back, thinking about many things. The response came almost immediately. "Maybe we should meet. There's a quiet place where no one will find us." I knew this was the start of something wrong. I knew I should answer no, but my fingers instinctively typed when and where. Thus began our secret meetings. We met in parts of the city I had never even considered before. Cafes on the outskirts, quiet parks, a hotel on a small hill with a breathtaking view of the city at night. Every time it was a place where no one knew us, where no one could see us. Each meeting was filled with a mix of passion and fear, anticipation and apprehension. I could see Nicholas change when he was with me. His confidence, his boldness inspired me. With him, I felt alive, as if every cell in my body was waking up from a long slumber. We could talk for hours, laugh, argue, or sometimes just remain silent, looking into each other's eyes. But every touch, every look seemed to tell me that we were on the edge of something bigger, something beyond control. Yet, with each passing day, I felt more and more guilt toward Brian. Every time he asked how my day went, I felt the words getting stuck in my throat. I had to come up with excuses to explain my late returns from work. Inside, a sense of guilt was growing, weighing down on me more than I could have imagined. One evening, while sitting at dinner, I noticed Brian looking at me for a long time, his gaze steady. "Is everything all right?" I asked, trying to hide my anxiety. "You've changed, Lily," he said quietly, not looking away. "I can't exactly tell what it is, but something about you seems different." I felt my cheeks flush with heat and quickly looked away. What could I say? Confess? Tell the truth? But I couldn't. I just nodded and smiled as best as I could, though not very convincingly. "Just a lot of work," I mumbled. "Projects, new tasks. Maybe it's just draining me." He looked at me, his gaze penetrating, but fortunately, he chose not to continue the conversation. That same evening, I met Nicholas in a small cafe on the other side of the city. He saw that I was troubled and asked, "Is everything okay?" I shook my head. "Brian is starting to suspect something," I admitted, looking into his eyes. "I feel like I can't go on like this." Nicholas slowly reached across the table and took my hand in his. "I understand, Lily," he said softly, "but you need to decide what you truly want. We can't remain hidden forever. I'm ready to be with you, but I also don't want you to torment yourself." His words were honest and direct. I felt as if I was standing on the edge of a precipice, not knowing what to do next. It seemed I was stuck between two worlds, the world of stability with Brian, and the world of passion and adventure that Nicholas was opening up for me. "I don't know what to do," I whispered, feeling tears well up in my eyes. I never thought I would find myself in this situation. Nicholas gently squeezed my hand. "You don't have to decide everything right now," he said, and I felt a bit of relief. "But I want you to know that this is not just a game for me. I genuinely want to understand what there is between us." I nodded, and we continued our conversation. With every minute, I felt myself becoming more attached to him, but I also knew that this couldn't go on forever. The secret meetings brought as much joy as they did pain. I understood that the longer this continued, the more painful the end would be. But every time I tried to end it, Nicholas found the words to keep me from doing so. And I gave in again. We continued to see each other, and each time I felt like I was losing more control over my life. My days had become a series of meetings, hidden glances, and stolen moments. And at home, Brian's eyes awaited me, full of questions. And I knew this was only the beginning. Something had to change. But what exactly, I did not know. On that day, when I returned home after one of my meetings with Nicholas, I noticed the kitchen light was on, and soft music was playing behind the bedroom door. It was strange. Usually, Brian would come home late, tired, and irritated after work, never wasting time on things like music. I kicked off my shoes at the door and slowly walked deeper into the house. In the kitchen, a table was set with a white tablecloth, and a pair of candles, already melted down by a third, stood in the center. Nearby was a bottle of wine and a dish of pasta. I froze, surprised. Could it be that Brian had decided to surprise me? Lily? His voice came from behind the door. He peeked out from the bedroom, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. I thought you weren't coming back. I smiled nervously, trying to hide my surprise. Oh, Brian, I whispered. What is all this? He came closer to me, and I saw sincerity and longing in his eyes. I know we've both been busy lately, he began, trying to find the right words. And I feel like we've lost some connection with each other. So I thought, why not try to start over? His words pierced me like a knife. I felt my heart begin to race. At first, I felt ashamed that I had become involved with Nicholas, while my husband was trying to bring us back to what we had before. But then I felt something else. Something like frustration, even irritation. Why hadn't he done this earlier? Why only now, when I already felt I could lose myself? That's sweet, Brian, I said, trying not to reveal my true feelings. But, please, just give me a chance, he interrupted, not letting me finish my sentence. Let's just spend this evening together. No work, no phones, just you and me. I sighed and nodded. Maybe I really should give it a try. Perhaps if I focused on our marriage, I could feel something again, something right, something real. But inside, resistance was already growing. I knew I was trying to find excuses for my feelings for Nicholas, not to save our marriage. We sat down at the table, and he poured me some wine, smiling with hope. We talked about trivial things, his work, my projects, plans for the weekend. But my thoughts kept returning to Nicholas. I saw him in front of me, felt his touch, heard his voice in my head. I tried to concentrate on my conversation with Brian, but another person had already long settled in my soul. Lily, are you listening to me? Brian asked, leaning forward to get my attention. I flinched and looked at him. Yes, of course, I replied, realizing I hadn't been listening to what he was saying at all. What's going on with you? He asked gently, but with clear concern in his voice. You're so distant. You've changed. I didn't know what to say. The words stuck in my throat. All my energy was focused on not revealing my true feelings, not showing how far I had already gone. I tried to find an excuse, but nothing came to mind. Just a lot of work. I repeated the old excuse again, feeling how empty it sounded. Brian sighed, set his glass down on the table, and reached out to take my hand. Lily, I love you. And I can see that something is going on. His voice trembled. If you're no longer happy with me, if you need something else, tell me. But please, don't keep it inside. We can fix everything if we're honest with each other. His words struck me deeply. Honesty. That was what I was lacking most of all. But I couldn't be honest with him because that would mean admitting that I had betrayed his trust. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I quickly lowered my head to hide them. I'm just confused, I whispered. He squeezed my hand tighter, his eyes filled with pain. I'm ready to help you figure it out, he said, but you have to be willing to give me a chance. At that moment, I realized I was standing at a crossroads. Brian was asking me to stay with him, to try to make things right. He was ready to fight for our marriage, for me, but I already knew my feelings for Nicholas were growing stronger. Could this dinner bring us back to the way we were, or was it just an illusion? I looked at Brian, saw his kindness and the desperation in his eyes, and understood I had to make a choice. But I didn't know if I had the strength. Could my love for my husband overcome this new, exciting feeling? Or had I already gone too far to turn back? All right, Brian, I said quietly, not knowing if I was speaking the truth. I'll try. But deep down, I knew the struggle was just beginning, and that everything would only get harder from here on out. Every day, my life seemed to spiral further into chaos. I found myself torn between two worlds, one foot firmly planted in the stability and safety of my marriage with Brian, and the other in the realm of new, unexplored emotions that Nicholas offered me. And every day, that rift grew more and more apparent. Brian began to notice the changes. I could see it in his eyes, in his questions, in how he started spending more time at home, trying to stay close. He used to work late often, But now, it seemed more important for him to know what was going on with me. His suspicions grew stronger, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. One evening, when I came home later than usual, he was waiting for me at the door with a serious expression. "Lily," he began, not waiting for me to take off my coat. "I'd like to talk to you." "Of course." I tried to appear calm, but inside, everything was tightening up. "Did something happen?" He nodded, looking me straight in the eyes. "I've noticed that lately, you've been staying late at work quite often," he said. "You've had many meetings you never mentioned before. You often come home later than usual, and I don't understand why. Is it because of a new project?" I froze, trying to maintain my composure. It was the first time he had directly asked me about my schedule. I felt my head start to spin with anxiety. "Yes," I replied, trying to sound confident. "We're going through a really intense period. Nicholas is actively implementing new approaches, and we're all working hard on these changes." He nodded, but there was still doubt in his eyes. "I see," he said. "But why do you never mention your meetings? Why don't you tell me what's going on?" I felt panic rising inside me. I needed to come up with another plausible excuse, and fast. I I just don't want to burden you with my work problems," I tried to explain. "I know you already have enough on your plate." But his gaze remained stern. He was silent, and that silence was heavier than any words. "Lily," he finally said quietly, "I feel like something is wrong. And if you don't want to tell me, I'll understand. But I don't want there to be lies between us." Those words struck me like lightning from a clear sky. Lies. He had sensed that I wasn't being truthful with him. I couldn't look him in the eyes. My hands were trembling. "I'm just tired," I finally said, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. "I need a little time to figure everything out." He nodded, but I could see he didn't fully believe me. "All right," he said calmly. "I'll give you time. But please, Lily, don't keep me in the dark." I nodded, but inside, panic was flaring up. How long could I continue hiding my double life? The next day, I met Nicholas at a small cafe in the park, far from the office and home. He noticed my tension and asked what was wrong. "Brian suspects something," I admitted, looking into his eyes. "He's noticed my frequent late hours at work and the oddities in my schedule." Nicholas nodded, his face remaining calm. "And what did you tell him?" he asked. "Something about new projects," I replied with a sigh. "But I'm not sure he believed me. I just can't keep living like this, torn between two worlds." Nicholas moved closer and took my hand in his. "Lily, I understand," he said softly. "But we need to be careful. If you want to keep your marriage, we'll have to meet less often." I felt his words pierce me, and I realized I wasn't ready for that. "But I don't want to stop meeting," I whispered, looking at his hands holding mine. "I just don't know how to handle all of this." He smiled slightly, as if he understood my doubts and fears. "Then maybe we should try something different," he suggested. "Be more creative about how we spend time together, so no one can guess." His words made me think. My life had already turned into a puzzle of excuses and half-truths. Every word, every gesture, every step had to be carefully considered to avoid revealing myself. And the deeper I got into this, the harder it was to understand what I truly wanted. When I returned home, Brian greeted me with the same look again. He didn't ask anything else, but his silence was more eloquent than words. I knew he wouldn't give up and would keep searching for answers. My lies were growing like a snowball, and I felt that soon it wouldn't end well. I found myself checking my phone more often, looking for messages from Nicholas, and whenever Brian looked my way, I caught myself quickly putting the phone back in my bag, as if hiding from his gaze. I didn't want him to see how much I had changed, but it seemed he already knew. I tried to be more attentive, inventing new excuses to justify my behavior, but every day my story grew more complicated. I had no strength left to think about anything other than not revealing myself. I realized I could no longer live in this maze of half-truths, but I still didn't know how to stop. And then I began to wonder, maybe it's time to make a choice. But which one? I couldn't imagine what it would be like to lose Brian. But I also couldn't resist what I felt for Nicholas any longer. It seemed to me that I was standing on the edge of an abyss, and the only question left was, would I jump? The next morning began like any other. I was rushing to work, trying to catch a taxi in the morning traffic. Brian was in the kitchen, making coffee, as he did every day. I automatically checked my phone to make sure there were no new messages from Nicholas, and left it on the kitchen counter while I threw on my coat. "Lily, do you want some coffee?" Brian called from the kitchen, and I replied that I didn't. I was in a hurry. When I returned to the kitchen to grab my phone, I saw Brian looking at the screen. His brows were furrowed, his eyes darting over the screen, and I realized he was reading a message. What is this, Lily? His voice was unexpectedly quiet, but I sensed the tension in it. I stepped closer, and he raised the phone so I could see. On the screen, a message from Nicholas glowed brightly. I can't stop thinking about you. When will we see each other again? My chest tightened. My heart skipped a beat. I felt my hands start to shake. How could I have forgotten to delete that message? Why hadn't I been more careful? It's... I stammered, trying to think of something that could explain it. It's just... a colleague. We were discussing work. Brian pressed his lips together and looked at me closely. A colleague, he repeated. Work! Do you think I'm stupid? I felt panic engulf me. There was no trace of his usual softness in his voice. He was waiting for an explanation, and I knew I could no longer hide the truth. I tried to take a deep breath, but couldn't. Inside me, a fire of fear and shame was growing. Brian, it's not what you think, I began, but he interrupted me. Then tell me what it is, Lily. What's going on? Why is your boss sending you messages like that? Why aren't you telling me the truth? I felt a wave of despair wash over me. I couldn't look him in the eyes. I was afraid of what I would see there. Pain, disappointment, anger. I knew that everything would be decided now, that this moment could be the end of our marriage. It was just a mistake, I said, trying to speak confidently, though my head was spinning from the tension. We communicate about work, and sometimes the conversations go too far. He looked at me even more intently, his eyes full of pain. Too far? Lily, don't try to play games with me. His voice was firm, resolute. I'm not a fool. I can see something is happening. You're not the person you used to be. You've changed, and I want to know the truth, right now. I felt my breath quicken, as if I were underwater and couldn't breathe. I was still trying to find words to get out of this situation, but I realized that every excuse I made was only making things worse. Brian, I began, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. I didn't want it to go this far. I didn't plan this. He closed his eyes, and I saw his face turn pale. Did you cheat on me? He asked quietly, as if afraid to hear the answer. I stood there, unable to utter a word. My entire world seemed shattered, and I knew there was no going back. Whatever I said now, it wouldn't be right. And yet, I could no longer lie. Yes, I finally whispered, feeling tears running down my cheeks. Yes, I made a mistake. I got confused. His face changed. For a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes, somewhere between anger and pain. He clenched his fists, and his lips trembled. With whom? He asked sharply. With whom did you do this? I couldn't answer. I couldn't say Nicholas's name. At that moment, I realized I had no acceptable excuse. All the words that could have softened the situation disappeared. It doesn't matter, I began, but he interrupted me. It doesn't matter? His voice grew louder. Do you think it doesn't matter? That it's just a mistake that can be forgotten? He stood up, his eyes blazing with anger. I thought you would always be honest with me. We talked about being open, remember? And now I see that you've been lying to me. All this time. I felt his words pierce me like a knife. I knew I deserved it, but it didn't ease the pain. I'm sorry, I pleaded, trying to move closer to him. I got lost. I didn't want it to end like this. But he stepped back, avoiding my touch. You should have thought about that earlier, Lily, he said, and I realized that his voice now sounded cold, detached. Now it's too late. I looked at him, feeling the world crumble around me. I had lost control of everything that seemed so important. I stood on the brink of something irreparable, and all I could do was hope there was still a chance to fix it. Brian, please, give me a chance, I begged. But he just shook his head. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again, he said. And turning away, he walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone in the empty room. I realized the moment of truth had come. And whatever happened next, life would never be the same again. It's been a week since everything came to light. A week of exhausting silence and hidden tension in the house, where I once felt safe. Brian hasn't spoken to me. He even avoided looking in my direction. We've become like two strangers living under the same roof, sharing a space, but not a life. And every day, it became more unbearable. One evening, when I came back from work, I saw all my things neatly piled up by the doorstep. My suitcases, clothes, books, everything that had once filled our home. I felt a chill inside me. My heart started beating faster, and I rushed into the house to find Brian. He was standing in the living room, hunched over as if under the weight of an invisible burden. His eyes were fixed on the floor, his hands tightly clenched into fists. When he finally looked at me, there was nothing in his gaze but emptiness and fatigue. Brian, I began, not knowing what to say. What does this mean? He raised his hand to stop me. Lily! His voice sounded tired but firm. I've thought a lot about us, about what happened, and I've come to the conclusion that I can't continue living like this anymore. My heart tightened with fear. I knew he could make such a decision, but I hoped he would give me another chance. Please listen to me, I began, but he interrupted me again. No, Lily, I've already made up my mind. His voice was sharp, and I felt tears well up in my eyes. I can't forgive what you did. I can't forget. You betrayed me, and now I realize that I will never be able to trust you again. Never. I closed my eyes, feeling the tears streaming down my cheeks. I knew I deserved this, but it didn't make the pain any less sharp. You have to go, he continued, pointing to the door. I've already filed for divorce. I don't want to see you in this house anymore. I looked at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. He was really going to throw me out. The very man who had once promised to love me no matter what. But, Brian, I started, trying to find some words to convince him to change his mind. Please don't do this. Give me another chance. We can fix everything. He shook his head. No, Lily, I can't live with someone I don't trust. This is the end. His words pierced me like a knife. I felt the ground slipping from under my feet. Everything that seemed so stable, so familiar, was now collapsing. I could no longer hold back the tears, and began to cry, sinking to my knees. Brian turned away, his face stony. He no longer wanted to see my pain, no longer wanted to hear my pleas. He had already made his decision. Take your things and leave, Lily, he said quietly but firmly. Please. I understood that arguing was useless. I knew his decision was final. He was right. I had betrayed his trust, destroyed what we had. But realizing this didn't make it any easier for me. With great difficulty, I got up, gathered my suitcases, and left the house. The door slammed shut behind me, and I was left alone, outside, in the cold darkness. I didn't know where to go, what to do next. I had lost everything that was dear to me. And at that moment, I thought of Nicholas, the only person who understood me, who might be able to support me. I pulled out my phone and with trembling fingers, dialed his number. Nicholas, it's Lily, I said, trying not to cry. I need to talk to you. Brian kicked me out. I don't know where to go. His response was almost immediate, but his voice was colder than I expected. Lily, he said calmly, I'm sorry that this happened, but I don't think I can help you. I felt something break inside my chest. But, you said I was important to you, that you wanted to understand what was between us, I began, feeling panic rising. Please, Nicholas, I'm so confused. I need your support. Lily, he interrupted, his voice remaining cold and distant. I never promised you anything serious. It was a temporary infatuation. It was interesting, but I'm not looking for a serious relationship, and moreover, I don't want to get involved in your personal life. I froze, as if I had been slapped in the face. Was that all it meant to him? Just a temporary infatuation? I felt the world around me crumble even faster than I could have imagined. So, you were just playing with me? I whispered, barely holding back tears. I didn't mean to hurt you, Lily, he said, his voice softening, but I never made any promises. I'm sorry. I hope you find your way. And with those words, he hung up. I stood there alone, shivering from the cold and bitterness. My entire life, everything I thought was important and real, turned out to be an illusion. I lost my husband, lost Nicholas, lost everything, and now I didn't know where to go. I felt completely lost, as if I no longer had a place in this world. I realized I was at rock bottom, and now I had to find my way back up on my own. But how to do it when everything around seemed broken and empty? In the first few days after Brian kicked me out of the house, I felt like I was in a fog. I couldn't believe this was really happening to me. Every day, I woke up in the rented room I had hurriedly arranged and stared at the white walls, trying to grasp that I had lost everything. My home, my family, my stability. I cried every day. Every minute without Brian was torturous. I wandered around the city aimlessly, trying to find solace in my thoughts. But the more I reflected, the more I realized the mistake I had made. I had destroyed what was most important to me for a fleeting attraction, for an illusion that disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Nicholas didn't answer my calls. I had to accept that he truly didn't want anything to do with me. Our meetings, his words, all of it turned out to be empty. He was just a spark that made me feel something new, but gave me nothing real. I understood that his fascination with me was temporary. I was naive to think it could be something more. I lost track of time. Days blended into weeks, and all I could feel was pain, emptiness, and cold. I had lost Brian, the person who loved me no matter what, who was by my side during the most difficult moments of my life, who wanted to build a future with me. And now, when I realized how much I loved him, it was already too late. I tried to find comfort in work, but it was impossible. My thoughts always returned to Brian. I saw his face in front of me, his eyes full of pain when he learned the truth. I heard his words, filled with disappointment and anger, and it tormented me like poison slowly eating away at my soul. One day, while walking in the park, where Brian and I often went together, I could no longer hold back the tears. I sat on a bench and covered my face with my hands. All I could think about was how much I wanted to turn back time, how much I wanted to fix everything, to change everything, to make the right choice. People passed by, sometimes stopping and looking at me curiously, but I didn't care. At that moment, I realized that everything I had built over the years, had been destroyed because of me. My own decisions had brought me to this point. I remembered our last conversation with Brian, his words that tore me apart. I can't live with someone I don't trust. I understood that he was right. I had destroyed our trust, and now I had to pay for it. Everything I had was now lost. I could no longer continue living in the past. I needed to find a way to move forward. I realized that I couldn't keep blaming someone else for my mistakes. Only I could put my life back in order. Only I could find a way out of this darkness. One evening, I gathered the courage to write Brian a letter, not asking for forgiveness. I knew he wasn't obligated to forgive me, but with sincere apologies. I confessed all my mistakes, told him how deeply I regretted treating him the way I did, and how much I valued everything he had done for me. I acknowledged my guilt and promised not to interfere in his life anymore. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but I knew I had to do it. A few days later, I received a response. Short but honest. Lily, I appreciate your words. I understand that you regret it, but I can't go back to what was. I need to move on. I hope you find your path too. Goodbye. I read his letter and felt the weight I had been carrying inside lighten a little. Brian was right. I had to find my way. Not for him, not for anyone else, but for myself. I made a terrible mistake, and I had to live with its consequences, but I also realized that I couldn't stay in this state forever. I began seeing a therapist to understand myself, to figure out why I allowed my emotions to cloud my judgment, why I betrayed the person I loved. I started learning to accept my mistakes and move forward, not avoiding the pain, but learning to live with it. It wasn't easy. Every morning, I woke up with a feeling of emptiness, but each day, that emptiness became a little less painful. I was learning to live again, slowly, step by step. I realized that my path to healing would be long, but I was ready to take it. I knew I would never be able to forget Brian and the love we once shared. But I also understood that this love, despite everything, had taught me a lot. It taught me to value true feelings, trust, and sincerity. It taught me to be honest with myself. And although I had lost much, I began to find what truly mattered: myself. And I hope that someday, somewhere, I can love again. But this time, I will know how to preserve what truly matters. I know my actions led to the loss of everything that was important. I destroyed what I loved for the sake of a fleeting feeling that turned out to be an illusion. Now I live with the consequences of my mistakes, and it's not easy. My advice to anyone listening to these words: do not let doubts and temporary infatuations overshadow what truly matters in your life. Cherish your family, your trust, and your love. Don't destroy what you have built for years for the sake of a momentary passion. Sometimes, what seems new and exciting is, in fact, just a deceptive shine. It is not worth destroying true love for a mirage, because when that mirage disappears, you may find yourself completely alone, just like I did.